Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, herzlich willkommen. Deutsche Kurs. Hi, I'm Dr. Morgan Rich, and I am new here. I'm the new assistant director. If you have questions at any time about class funding or others, I'm your person now. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you today. And at the Center for European Studies, we are a John Monnet Center of Excellence and a Title VI National Resource Center for Europe. So the center is multidisciplinary in area, and we support language teaching. So thank you for joining us today, and we're so pleased that our first lunchtime symposium of the semester is Dr. Armin Langer. His talk today, as you can read on the screen, is Wrapping the German-Turkish Experience, Representation of Immigrant Integration in Germany in rapper Eko Fresh's Music. This talk is, as I said, the first lunchtime symposium, and we host 3 to 4 per semester. So keep an eye on your classes and your listservs and all of that stuff. They're for faculty and advanced graduate students. So if you have an idea, something you'd like to propose for spring or in the future, please get in touch. Our contact person for that is Carla Rupert, who's not here today, but you can find her on our website and her email. So today, Armin Langer is our speaker, and Dr. Langer is a DAAD, visiting assistant professor for CES. His research interests are migration, identity politics, and populism in Europe and the United States. He is the author of a monograph on German-Jewish integration, and before coming to UF, he was a visiting research scholar at Brandeis University's Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. So if you haven't already, and you heard Dr. Propel, please sign in and please take this survey and leave it at the table as you leave. And in hurricane news, if you don't take a sandwich, we'll be really sad. So with that, Dr. Langer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rich, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. I am honestly surprised that so many of you showed up. I was expecting to be on my own with Hurricane Ian. So thank you for being here, and enjoy your meal for those of you who are eating. I'm not jealous at all. Before I would start discussing Eko Fresh and hip hop as a tool of telling about the experience of Turkish immigrants, I just wanted to speak about my own position in this whole topic. Who am I to speak about German-Turkish immigrants and their music in the early 2000s? I am a follower of Max Weber. Some of you might be familiar with Max Weber's work. Also, by training, I'm a sociologist, so I will refer to many sociologists today. I hope you don't mind. And Max Weber writes in one of his, in my opinion, most important essays on the objectivity of the scholar, that the scholar is not objective. The scholar is informed by their life experiences, by their family's history, and that is definitely also true for myself. I don't have a Turkish immigration background, but I do have an immigration background in a German context. I was born in Germany to a family of Hungarian immigrants. Now, the experience of Hungarian immigrants in Germany is, of course, not the same as the experience of Turkish immigrants, but there is a lot in Eko Fresh's lyrics and music I can relate to, both politically and also emotionally. That's for my position in this topic. And I will now start with a context of what do we mean when we speak about immigration to Germany. It's an ongoing debate whether Germany is a country of immigration or not. I mean, obviously it is a country of immigration, but the debate is still ongoing. And as you will see, this whole dichotomy of Germans versus immigrants, or Germans and immigrants, is also a recurring topic in the work of Eko Fresh. Now, last year, according to the federal data, about 26% of the population of Germany had a so-called immigration background. What does that mean? The term itself is, of course, a bit controversial. Having an immigration background, which is the official term in Germany, means that either you or one of your parents is an immigrant, meaning that I count as a person who has immigration background in Germany. Even though I was born in Germany, I'm a German citizen. My German is way better than my Hungarian. Nevertheless, I'm going to teach a course next term, the Hungarian, if anybody is interested. I just found out this morning. So the term itself is, of course, a bit complicated because different immigrant populations, as I've already mentioned, have different experiences. If a white immigrant obviously will not have the same experiences as an immigrant of color, and that's also true for a German context. And also depending on what the citizenship status is, whether you're a European Union citizen, will have a completely different reality for you in Germany than if you are somebody whose ancestors come from Turkey, for instance. Another big issue in a German context is the definition of citizenship. Now, today, about half of people with an immigration background actually have a German passport, meaning they are Germans by citizenship. The other half has no German passport. They have, till today, the citizenship of their ancestors. A big issue is who gets to have a German passport. Germany, unlike the US, doesn't give you citizenship if you were born on German soil, meaning it's not enough to be born in Munich or Cologne or Berlin. You have to have at least one German parent to be automatically eligible for a German passport. There is also a longer path to German passport, meaning you have to spend at least such and such years, have to have an income, certain amount of income. You have to prove that you have totally integrated into your host society. So it's a long path to citizenship, and it's not automatic just based on your place of birth. And the whole concept or ruling concept of Germanness is really very much defined by, if you ask me, pretty old school definitions of nation and ethnicity. There are several studies, some of them I present on this slide, which prove that the German we, that the understanding of our collective, who we are as Germans, is until today defined by concepts such as German values and traditions. What does that mean? I don't know. But if you ask Germans what makes somebody a German, it's not the citizenship. Only 1/3 said in a 2019 study that citizenship will define your belonging to the national collective. And the majority, 72%, said in the same study that living by German values or tradition is the thing which you have to strive for, which leads us also to these debates on dominant culture, which became especially popular in the 2000s. What makes a German? What are these German values and cultures? Very often these debates are explicitly Islamophobic, which is a topic to itself, but I wanted to mention. Now, I also wanted to say a few words, particularly about Turks in Germany. Very often we make the assumption that immigration to Germany is a recent development, but of course that's not true. Germany, or the territory which we call today Germany, because as you know, Germany as such did not exist before 1871. So Germany has been a country of immigration or a territory of immigration for centuries. We know of Turkish presence in Germany. Please note the quotation marks. Already in the Middle Ages, Turks who chose Christianity or were forced to baptize came to German countries after the Crusades. That's a thing. According to some sources, which I never double checked, so please don't believe me, Johann Goethe, one of the most important German poets, is also a descendant of some of these Turkish converts. I don't know, don't believe me, but it's And why did I put Turkish in quotation marks? Because many of these people are actually not ethnically Turkish. Like we call them Turks, but many of these people are, for instance, Alawites or Alawites, two different ethnic groups, not the same. Alawite, not the same. Or Kurds, or Arabs from Turkish countries, etc., etc. So, but nevertheless, Germans essentialize Turks, German Turks essentialize themselves too. So it's a complicated issue. But Turkish presence becomes especially relevant after the 1700s. The first Muslim cemetery in present-day Germany is established in 1763, which is obviously much earlier than the 20th century, where we would assume that Muslims show up suddenly in Germany. Nothing happens suddenly. It's a process. It's a process. So, like the hurricane I am. Okay. So, but most of Turks today in Germany are not the descendants of baptized Turks or merchants or diplomats. They are descendants of so-called guest workers who Germany invited in the early 1960s to come from Turkey to Germany and participate in the economic miracle of the late 1950s and 1960s. It is also connected to the fact that in 1961, the Berlin Wall is raised and there are no more workers coming from East Germany to West Germany. It's physically impossible. So that is one of the main reasons why West Germany turns to countries in North Africa and in the Middle East, like Turkey, Morocco, and Tunisia, to get these so-called guest workers. The term itself already tells us that the idea was that these so-called guest workers will return to their countries of origin. However, by the 70s, Germany kind of realizes that that won't happen. That is partially due to the fact that there are a series of crises in these countries of origin. Turkey is going through a military coup, for instance. And in 74, Germany allows these so-called guest workers to bring their families to Germany. The same or similar developments will happen also in other European countries. So it's not about Western European countries. So it's not only Germany which will invite guest workers from abroad. You'll find a similar tendency in the Netherlands, in Austria, Switzerland, France too, although there are of course also important differences. Now in the 1990s, we of course celebrate the reunification of Germany, and following the 1990s and especially in the 2000s, there are discussions emerging on what to do with all these immigrants. Suddenly Germans have to face the fact that the country is full of immigrants, and how can Germans live with that idea? Because Germans always have thought that we are a nation, or one ethnicity, one nation, etc., and suddenly we have to face the fact that 1/4 of our population is immigrant or descendants of immigrants, which leads to the first multiculturalism debates. Many of these debates are extremely painful. And I'm not sure if you know, but Germany in 2012 also almost became the first country on earth to ban circumcision, based on the notion that it is un-German and uncivilized to circumcise newborn babies, male babies. But of course, it goes back to a whole Islamophobic campaign about all these Turks and Muslims circumcising their newly born male babies. Several German states introduced headscarf bans, meaning if you have a headscarf, you're not allowed to teach in a public school. These laws are not as strict as in France, but they exist. And I would say that in recent years, especially after the so-called 2015 refugee crisis, Germany is shifting to a more open discussion on the role of immigrants and how Germany has turned into a country of immigration. That is partially due to Merkel, who had a more open approach to this question than her predecessors. Although, yeah, she had also some differing opinions, but towards the end of her tenure, she became more open to this idea. And we'll see what happens next. Okay, before we would start speaking about Eko Fresh, I just wanted to throw some social psychology at you. Henry Tajfel is, in case you don't know him, one of the most important British sociologists. A very interesting biography. If you want to look it up, I recommend it. And Tajfel focuses a lot on how minorities and immigrant populations in Western countries deal with the othering they face, meaning how he mostly looks at the African-American experience, but also brings examples from minorities in the Balkans, etc., etc. And he argues that social creativity is one of the most important strategies that minorities and immigrants can employ in order to maintain a strong identity and in order to empower themselves and also other members of their in-group. Social creativity in the definition of Henry Tetchfeld would be that members of a minority or immigrant group will redefine their otherness and reclaim certain markers of their otherness and turn it into something positive. They will play with stereotypes. They will use the stereotypes that the majority population assigns to them and turn it into something positive. The example that Tetchfeld always brings up is the African-American Black is Beautiful cultural motto that changed the negative, the assigned negative value of Black skin to a positive one. Now, I like to use Henry Tetchfeld's theory to speak about the German-Jewish reorientalization in the 19th century. If any of you have ever visited Berlin, that is the new synagogue. It's called the New Synagogue in Berlin Mitte, in the Berlin city center. And somebody might say it looks like a mosque. I heard that before. It was built to look like a mosque because the architect said, okay, if the white Germans keep telling us that we are Semites, that we are Orientals, that we do not really belong to Germany, but belong to the Middle East, then we will build a synagogue that looks like a mosque. Okay. And not only that, but towards the late 1800s, we can find many examples for German Jewish poetry, literature, also scholarly and rabbinic literature, which will emphasize the fact that Jews have an Oriental heritage, so-called Oriental heritage, and that Jews should be proud of it and Jews should embrace it. And this is the time when suddenly Jews start to have good memories of living under Muslim rulers in Muslim-occupied Spain, for instance, so-called golden era of Andalusia, which of course did not exist as 19th century Jews imagined it, but they use social creativity to reinterpret the majority's claims about Jews being the other, Jews being the so-called Oriental other. And I would argue that very often in present-day contemporary Germany, Muslim artists or artists who have a so-called migration background from a country that is predominantly Muslim will intentionally orientalize themselves and emphasize and highlight their otherness and reappropriate terms that the white majority assigns or to them or uses them to stigmatize. Here are a few examples on the slides. Heimatlos means without a homeland, and that is a collection of poems by German-Turkish poets. Many of these poems play with the assigned stereotypes about Turks in Germany. Another example could be the spoken word collective Parallel Society, Parallelgesellschaft in German, which is one of the most popular anti-immigrationist claims in Germany, that all these immigrants would form their parallel societies instead of taking an active part in the host society. And I will highlight another development for reorientalization or reappropriating stigmas and social stigmas. That is the usage of the word Kanake, which has a racist history. So for decades, it was exclusively used by white Germans to describe non-Western immigrants, especially if these non-Western immigrants were immigrants of color. But in the past 10, 15 years, it has been reappropriated by immigrant communities, especially by German Turks, to speak about themselves. And it is now a term of self-identification. So this is the context. And now after 20 minutes, let's speak about Eko Fresh. Fairly young black sweatshirt. Born in the 80s in Cologne. His mother's side came to Germany as guest workers, so-called guest workers. His father was a refugee from Turkey. As I mentioned before, Turkey went through a lot in the 70s. Eko Fresh has been active as a rapper since 2000. He was a mentee of Pool Savage, who is also a German-Turkish rapper. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's pretty famous in Germany. Pool Savage has, I would say that has definitely a different style today than Eko Fresh. Eko Fresh is today more political and speaks a lot about social issues. Pool Savage is a battle rapper. So he basically disses other rappers and people, and women especially. Well, has also a lot of homophobic content, so I'm not a big fan of Pool Savage. I want to say that you will find examples for misogyny and also homophobia for some of the earliest works of Eko Fresh, but after his split with his mentor in 2005, he has definitely shifted to a more mainstream kind of hip hop. And as I mentioned before, he's today a political rapper. So many of his latest tracks are definitely political. And even though they still contain some misogynistic language, that is definitely not the focus anymore. I know it's hard to separate, but yeah, I'm making some compromises in my life. Okay. I have to admit, I didn't expect so many people to come, so I did not prepare so many handouts. There are handouts around 10. People, please share them. What we're going to do now, and this is the best part of the presentation, is to listen to music. It would be a weird presentation without music. Before we would do that, I just wanted to offer you a brief introduction to the first song, which we're going to listen to. The first song is called Quentürke. It's on page 1. I translated Quentürke as token Turk. Quota in German means quota. That I could have used that translation, but I think in English token sounds better. Quentürke in a German context would mean that many German companies, organizations have a quota for minorities, for instance, or have a quota for women. And the term Quotenfrau, which would translate as quota woman, is very common in misogynistic circles. And also Quotenmigrant or Quotenausländer, like quota foreigner, Quotenimmigrant, are also very common terms in German anti-immigrationist circles. So when Eko Fresh decides to call himself a Quentürke, a token Turk, he obviously plays with these stereotypes that Turks have their place in society only if they have to fulfill a quota. Okay, I use the term token, which I borrow from Malcolm X. It's not only Max Weber that I like, but also Malcolm X. And I think they go well with each other. And Malcolm X criticizes those minorities who fulfill certain quotas. And he uses the term token and tokenism to describe the role of these minorities in when they are elevated to certain social roles by the majority, and at the same time, the oppression of the minority has not ceased. So this is the process which Malcolm X describes as tokenism, and that's why I chose the term token Turk. In this song, you will see, and if you have the footnotes in front of you, there are many token Turks described in the song, or I would say German-Turkish celebrities who try to be as German as possible and not too Turkish, meaning who choose a path of assimilation into the German host society. But as Malcolm X says, all these efforts, of course, do not change the status quo and do not change the othering and the discursive oppression of the Turkish immigrant community. We'll listen to the song, maybe not the whole, and then I will point out a few other things about it. Hope this will work now. I encourage you all to watch the video at home because it's a good video. But for now, enjoy it.
Klopf, klopf, wer ist da? Der Quentürke, ihr Bitches. Manche schaffen durch die große Türe ins Business. Zum Beispiel mache ich schon seit ich schwitze mit meinem Lieder. Doch die Leute denken, was will dieser Türke jetzt schon wieder? Denn egal wie viel Talent auch in mir ruht, ich werd hauptsächlich gebucht, wenn man einen Ausländer sucht. Man, ich check's nicht, egal wie sehr am Start auch Eck ist. Die Gesellschaft will nicht mich, sondern nah an Eck ist. Fahrt die Aktien hat schon jeden Scheiß kein Lacken vor der Can. Doch irgendwie scheint er den Policeman leider nicht zu kennen. Was Kinofilm? Ich bleib bei Bock WM oder Autoball EM für die Scheibenwischer-Fans. Ich weiß, dass das manche neuerdings verwirrte, denn der König von Deutschland ist ein Türke. Wer längst Millionär wie Rapper aus den Staaten, doch das Geld für Mucke schmeißt der Türke in Automaten. Quentürke, oh Quentürke. Ganz egal wie sehr ich mich auch ändere, ich bleib immer dieser scheiß Ausländer. Quentürke, oh Quentürke. Scheißegal wie viel Kohle ich auch mache, ich bleib immer nur der Quotenkanacke. Ey, Eko, seit wann haben denn die Türken Wähler? Seit dem Bülent Ceylan meinen Bülük sehen kann. Denn Ekrem lässt den Sack hängen vor der Webcam, woraufhin Bülow meinte, Respekt, man. Bis dann Kayayana auf einmal da war, im scheiß Pyjama, weil er auf Skype nicht klar kam. Wir laufen übern roten Teppich, die Quotentürken, die mit Schuhen aber nicht mal in die Wohnung dürfen. Bei manchen gibt man zu, Leute, der Kampf, der zu Mundschuh spricht zum Beispiel besser Deutsch als Herr Lanz. Doch da gibt's auch welche, die da sprechen schwer viel, zum Beispiel der Gerät oder Mesut Özil. Du findest uns sogar im Pay-TV, DC bei Kekili ist dort auch stets beliebt. Ich wär schon Millionär, doch Türken kaufen keine CDs, die brauchen Gel, um am Wochenende saufen zu gehen. Was geht? Quentürke, oh Quentürke. Ganz egal wie sehr ich mich auch ändere, ich bleib immer dieser scheiß Ausländer. Quentürke, oh Quentürke. Scheißegal wie viel Kohle ich auch mache, ich bleib immer nur der Quotenkanacke. Was ist mit Gülcan, Dude?
Okay, that will be enough for today. I was actually going to speak about the video now, but I'm not going to do that. I really encourage you to watch the video. It's funny. The song is funny too, of course. I mean, aside from the whole issue of tokenism, there's a lot that Eko Fresh addresses here. I want to point, for instance, to the chorus, where it says that no matter how much I change, ganz egal wie sehr ich mich auch ändere, I will always be this F foreigner. Ich bleib immer dieser scheiß Ausländer. I don't mind saying the F word in German. I mean, Eko Fresh is obviously not a foreigner, right? Like he was born in Germany. His mother came to Germany when she was, I know, a teenager. His father came to Germany when he was very young, and Eko Fresh speaks better German than Turkish. That's something that he himself says. And he feels at home in Germany, and he will address that in one of the other songs I'm going to share with you. But the majority keeps othering him. The majority keeps othering him and other immigrants who are perceived as foreigners. And unfortunately, until today, even Germans who have a pro-immigrationist attitude will make the assumption that if you have a so-called immigration background, you're a foreigner. So Ausländer is a term which, of course, anti-immigrationist people will use, but unfortunately also those who are in favor of immigration, because there is no self-reflection about the meaning of that word and what that implies if you describe somebody as a foreigner. Even if they don't mean it harmful in a harmful way. Of course, it does something with the person who is being told that they are a foreigner just for having a so-called immigration background or an immigration story. I can tell you that my sister defines herself as the scheiß Ausländer, meaning an F foreigner, till today. She's not a foreigner, but she heard it so many times in her life that that's how she defines herself, which is very sad. I have to say at the same time, of course, it can be empowering for members of these immigrant communities and minorities to use the same terms and reappropriate it, especially if there is not much the minority can do about it, because this is really something that the majority had to deal with. And I hope, and I actually believe that this is not the closing, these are not the closing words, but I believe that Eko Fresh's work can contribute to this process where the majority might be more open to self-reflection and to discuss issues around national identity, for instance, and what does it mean to label somebody as a foreigner, and what's the meaning of the word German, what makes a German, and who belongs to Germany. These are, as I mentioned before, ongoing debates. And there's a lot one can address here. Like here, Eko Fresh says, we walk down the red carpet and talk in Turks, but they are not even allowed in the apartment with their shoes on, which kind of implies cultural differences between Turkish immigrants in Germany and Germans without immigration backgrounds. Okay, we have time for one more song. Do you want the funny one or the sad one? The funny one, okay. Okay, so I'll ask you now to turn to page 3, and we'll look at the song called Doppelleben, Double Life. So I think that there is a difference between the message of the second song and the first song. The first song had a joyful tune, kind of. The message was not so optimistic in my reading. It was, the first song had this attitude that, okay, I am a Turk and I will stay a Turk, whatever I do. Now, the second song speaks about having multiple national identities and feelings for Turkey and Turkish culture, but also feelings for Germany and German culture. So I think it's a good addition to the first song. The song begins with Achtung, Ironie, attention, irony. And yeah, I think it's telling that you have to put that at the very beginning of the song, that this is ironic and not meant seriously. We'll listen to a few stanzas and the chorus, and then speak about it. The song was presented on the album Deutscher Traum, German Dream, which is a great title. If you remember the first slide I showed you, that was the album cover. Okay, let's listen to this.
Achtung, Ironie, Ironie. Vor meinen Kanackenfreunden nutze ich den Artikel nicht. Das schickt sich nicht in der oberen, unteren Mittelschicht. Ich ducke mich aus Angst, sie würden mich entdecken. Hurry um die Ecke, denn ich muss die Currywurst verstecken. Oh, was ein Zufall, wir sind toll integriert. Autos und Fußball, ich bin voll interessiert. Ob mein Hacker das checkt, dass mir Baklava nicht schmeckt. Wenn die Maskerade fällt, egal, ich mache auch korrekt. Doch wie halte ich es geheim, dass ich von türkischer Popmusik im allerbesten Falle nur einen möglichen Kotzreiz krieg. Ich nutze, dass ich beim Schauspielunterrichte war und guck, als wäre das wie eine Riesensause in der Shisha-Bar. Komm, mein Bruder, wir reden irgendwas mit Politik, es gibt nichts Schöneres, als wenn ein Türke grad die Knowledge kickt. Ich kann verstehen, dass jetzt manche enttäuscht wirken, doch das ist das ganz normale Leben eines Deutsch-Türken. Ich führe ein Doppelleben, auch wenn es dich empört. Ich werde trotzdem leben, als wenn es mich nicht stört. Komm mir doch auf die Schliche, denk, dass du mich entlarvst. Doch nicht mein Doppelleben, wer bin ich grad? Vor meinen deutschen Freunden nutze ich den Artikel wieder und weiß, wie das Christbaumlied war vor dem Krippenspiel da. Ich finde das ganz normal, wie du mit deinen Eltern redest. Klar, du bist Mittelstand, es fährt doch alle Welt Mercedes. Unser Schrebergarten ist mir heilig und glaub mir, Partyschlager ist nicht peinlich. Wurde nie im Leben überwacht, außer von Erika bei Edeka, die denkt, ich hab die Kekse eingepackt. Weil ich Chorknabe bin, der in Burggraben schwimmt, findet ihr das Schnurrbart-Ding und den Turban nicht schlimm. Mario Barth ist sowas von witzig und Jungs. Als ein Tag ist Ostern ganz wichtig für uns. Auf Klassenfahrt war's nichts Neues für mich, dass ich am Lagerfeuer sitz mit dem Mädchen auf dem Schoß. Ich hab keine Erektion, ich werd das ja noch steuern dürfen. Das ist das ganz normale Leben eines Deutsch-Türken. Ich führe ein Doppelleben, auch wenn es dich empört.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, the first song kind of assumed that the Turk in Germany will always remain a Turk, and that's it. But here, the second song, as you can read in the lyrics, I think there is more happening than that. He describes how he behaves in the company of his Turkish friends and how different that is from when he is in the company of German friends. Now I have to say, obviously, this dichotomy shouldn't exist between German friends and Turkish friends, because one can be German and Turkish at the same time. But this is, of course, an ironic song, and it plays with this dichotomy that is constructed by German society. I want to point your attention to the usage of the term Kanak, for instance, if you remember, I spoke about it earlier, how immigrant communities have been reappropriating that term. There are also many Turkish words that he uses, like arkadaş, meaning friend. That's the only one I see, but I know that there are more. And I find it very exciting how he juxtaposes so-called notions of Germanness, such as Christmas carols or Schrebergarten, the gardens that Germans love so much, with patterns of Turkishness, such as being in a hookah bar and going to a party. Yeah, I think it's good. It's good. And I didn't mention this before. It was on the slide. You probably saw that he's the composer of almost all of his songs, but he's also the writer, the author of these lyrics. I mean, he often has co-authors, but so that most of this comes from his brain. I also want to highlight how he said that in the part where he sings about his German identity, that I have never been under surveillance in my life except by Edeka, which is a random German name, at Edeka, which is a grocery store. So, I mean, on the one hand, that of course addresses some serious breaches of human rights and human rights violations, such as the mass surveillance of Muslim citizens in Germany and also in other Western societies, but also addresses racial profiling, which is a reality which many immigrants of color have to deal with in Germany. Because Erika, the cashier, or I know the employee at Edeka, the grocery store, thinks that Eko Fresh packed some cookies. And there's this one line I actually don't understand. He says that, I mean, why are boys both? Okay, whatever that means. I guess it sounds very German. Yeah, he also refers to elements of sexual racism at the end of the second stanza or second part. It says, yeah, I'm fine with sitting around the campfire with a girl on my lap and I will not have an erection, which of course plays with this idea that Turks or immigrants of color in general would be over-sexualized in contrast to white Germans who can control their sexual drives. These are just a few examples of how he addresses stereotypical thinking and how he turns these stereotypes around. And at the end, in part 3, he explicitly says that there is a Turk and a German together inside of me, which is kind of a nice conclusion for this song. We don't have time. We will not listen to the last song I've prepared, but I do encourage you to listen to it at home. You have the translation in case you don't speak German. I think that is one of the most beautiful songs Eko Fresh has written so far. It tells the story of 3 generations of Turkish immigrants in Germany, starting with his grandfather, who didn't even speak German, was a factory worker, came as a guest worker to the country. Then the second generation, which already knows German and has non-Turkish German friends, but has no voting rights because of the restrictive citizenship laws, which I mentioned before. And then the third generation, which is Eko Fresh himself, has a right to vote. That's how the song ends and feels like he arrived in Germany. So that song is a bit more melancholic, and sometimes I need to cry when I hear it. So it's probably best if we don't listen to it now. Okay. Now, I wanted to say a few more words about further research. Hip hop as a tool of expressing dissent with European majoritarian notions of belonging and citizenship is not only a phenomenon in Germany. I have the project idea, because I didn't really start to work on it yet, and that's not true, but should work more on this. Anyway, my big dream is to work on a book that compares different hip hop artists in different European countries and how they address the same issues that Eko Fresh is addressing in his work. On the images, you can see a few examples. Black M is a rapper from France who totally assimilates into, or wants to assimilate into, French norms of citizenship. but at the same time faces a lot of criticism and also Islamophobia, since he identifies as Muslim, and his Muslimness does not comply with French ideals of secularism, etc., etc. So that is a very interesting artist to follow. The ones in the middle, they are siblings from Vienna, Austria, called Ezra, Kurdish Austrians, whose work is, I think, pretty similar to Eko Fresh's. They also play with these double or multiple national identities. They are a bit more radical, I would say, than Eko Fresh, but also not so mainstream. I didn't speak so much about the economic aspects of Eko Fresh, but he's pretty mainstream by now. I wouldn't say that he's an A-list artist. There are artists who are more known than he is, but some of his tracks were actually hits. Like Quentürke, the one we listened to first, was a summer hit in 2013, kind of. I mean, pop music obviously is more popular. We are still in the realm of hip hop, but Eko Fresh is kind of known. Ezra is more alternative. Or on the right side, we can see an image of Ali Bey, who is a Dutch rapper, Moroccan Dutch rapper, and he is the opposite of Black M, because for Ali Bey, his Moroccan identity is actually more important than his Dutch identity. So in many of his songs, he will just stop rapping in Dutch and starts to sing in Moroccan Arabic, which is very challenging for me, but fortunately, I have people who speak Moroccan Arabic in my team, so that works. And in case you want to read something from me written about hip hop and politics, I don't know why the image is so big suddenly, but we'll live with that. I have an upcoming publication which I wrote about the hip hop collective Section d'Assaut. They are a French group which popularized hip hop in France. They consist of first and second generation immigrants from Senegal, Congo, and Benin. And this chapter is going to be published probably in December, but as we know, academic publishing doesn't work like that. It's an effort of scholars in Ghana and Senegal and in the US that will look at and my part looks at the image of West Africa in the lyrics of Section d'Assaut. I just noticed I didn't write the name of the band on the slide, so just listen to the pronunciation, Section d'Assaut. Okay. If there are any questions, reflections, I'm happy to take them.
Hi, this was a great introduction to Eko Fresh. I haven't listened to it, but I will definitely. And also, I listen to Turkish rap. I mostly listen like DAAD, and he's actually right now, like, I don't know if he actually got the asylum, but he's a political refugee in a way. He escaped Turkey, and he was somehow also inspired by the Turkish German rappers generations, such as Cartel, which was the first band. This was after Germany. In Germany, there were some arsons of the Turkish houses, and Cartel brought that rap experience to the Turkish people in Turkey, and they became this very popular band. And so as I kind of is very appreciative of Germany as a political refugee. So do you think there's a difference between coming as a guest worker and coming from that family tradition of being immigrants and the new asylum seekers coming from Turkey because they cannot actually do their music in Turkey anymore?
I think the key difference is that Germany today has a different approach to immigration than in the 60s or the 70s or even the 90s. Because today, for instance, immigrants and refugees too, when they arrive, they receive integration courses, German classes, etc. That's a thing which did not exist 40, 50 years ago. The assumption was that these millions of Turks, or hundreds of thousands of Turkish guest workers who arrived in Germany in the 60s, will leave after a few years. So they did not receive language classes, for instance. which of course didn't help their integration, but also the state didn't want to integrate them. And that is different today. Like the refugees who arrived in 2015 from Syria and Afghanistan, etc., they do or did receive language classes, and that obviously is a huge boost for them in their arrival in the country. So that is a development. I mean, as you could probably tell, I am very skeptical of current German notions of belonging and citizenship, but I do see a development in the right direction.
I'm curious, how do you assess, or what do you think, how representative someone like Eko Fresh for a German immigrant? Because I feel, I don't know, but like they have their own parallel society, like rap scenes in Berlin. They're very wealthy. They have at least a material standard to buy. I'm not sure if they still are so close to other immigrant populations.
Yeah, so that is a very good question. I think that when you refer to that, I mean, there are rappers, hip hop artists in Germany who are definitely extremely rich. And however, most of them, I don't know of anybody who comes from a rich family. Like most of these people that are involved today in the hip hop scene of Germany are second or third generation immigrants, descendants of so-called guest workers, just like Eko Fresh, but also like Kul Savaş, whom I mentioned in the presentation. So I would assume that their experiences growing up do inform their politics, whether they are still in touch with the larger community. I can't tell that. I would assume that's not the case for many of them, but it seems to be the case for Eko Fresh. So as I mentioned before, especially in recent years, many of Eko Fresh's lyrics and songs do speak to the real experiences of these communities. He even has some recent cooperations with recent Turkish refugees who came to Germany after when was the coup 20, or attempted coup 2015, 2016, something like that in Turkey. There was a wave of Turkish intellectuals who came to Germany as asylum seekers and refugees. And Eko Fresh also cooperated with them, for instance, for a song about facing challenges. And it's a song which is partially in Turkish. As I mentioned before, it's Turkish and not so good. So that's what he says. I can't judge because my Turkish is not so good either. Yeah.
I found it really interesting that you were talking about how rap and hip hop kind of like as an art form is used by immigrant communities like throughout Europe. Do you think that the use of like rap and hip hop music itself is that kind of like coming from almost like I'm wondering like how that parallels like its origins like in the US kind of as being like a tool for oppressed people? Like, is it something that has been kind of copied in that way, or what about it has made that be like such a tool in this scenario as well?
Okay, that is such a great question. So I wrote a few examples for immigrant hip hop at the end of the slides, and they all have different answers to the question. So Eko Fresh refers to American rappers. I think he also refers to them in one of these songs I wrote today. And he also uses some slang which comes from the US hip hop scene, which sounds especially strange when he's doing that in German, but he does it anyway. And he is obviously influenced by US hip hop artists. I would not say that he copies them, like, although the second song, it was not that original, I think, the beats, but for instance, Section d'Assaut, the ones I spoke about towards the end, they claim that hip hop has the origins actually in West Africa. So for them, hip hop is not American product, but a West African product. And they see themselves as West African immigrants in France, and they claim that hip hop is their original native way of expressing opinions. And they refer to, like in one of the interviews, one of the members of the collective refers to medieval records of people in present-day Ghana I mean, that's not the word they are using, but speaking fast in rhythmic background music and telling stories that way. That is something that we're finding medieval records, and to them that is one of the proofs they bring that hip hop is actually not from the US but from West Africa, just like they are. Which is interesting. For the record, that's also something that the scholars of hip hop sometimes believe. I mean, there's a dispute over that, of course. And they, as scholars of hip hop, would claim that these West African medieval West African rap came to the US, of course, with the enslavement of West Africans, which then developed in the US. Like, it's a process.
So I was looking at the lyrics. There was this quote about that Fatih Akın, who's a Turkish film director, who's also the winner of the Golden Bear, I believe, right? So are they? And you also mentioned that a TV celebrity. So is he kind of showing anger towards more German Turkish or well integrated immigrants? Is that some kind of betrayal for him?
You all have so many good questions. I don't think it's betrayal. I think there's some sort of disappointment because Eko Fresh sees all these successful Turks in Germany, but at the same time sees the continuous othering of Turkish minorities in Germany. I think that contradiction is not a contradiction, unfortunately, but that dualism is the phenomenon he wants to address with Quentürke. So even though there are individual successes, the status quo has not changed. I don't think it's blaming Fatih Akın or any of the other people he mentioned.
Everyone, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to come today. Second of all, please bring back those slips of paper and sign it if you have it. And third, let's give Dr. Langer a round of applause.